My name is Grechishkin from Mount Vernon High School. I'm performing the speech for the 2020 Auburn Riverside Online Tournament. The mind-numbing boredom of quarantine and the isolation caused by COVID has caused all of us to turn to new hobbies or readopt fads of the past in search of any entertainment we can get. Who hasn't seen a social media post about someone making whipped coffee, baking sourdough bread, or trying their very hardest to master the newest TikTok dance? However, there's one phase that hasn't made a comeback, yet deserves a second look. It's time we all don our polyester leisure suits and gold chains as we get ready to jungle boogie through the groovy sound of the 1970s. Disco music. By embracing disco as a form of entertainment while we attempt to avoid any Saturday Night Fevers during this pandemic, we can better understand its unique cultural relevance and see that you and I will survive all this hot stuff. The music we identify as disco first emerged in the early 1970s and gradually began to replace groups like the Beach Boys and the Monkees in favor of the fresh sound of groups like ABBA and the Bee Gees. Born out of exclusive, membership-only clubs throughout the US and Europe, disco flew below the radar of the general public initially because of its role as a reaction against the mainstream white rock groups of the time. The term disco was first coined when venues in Paris began using turntables to play music instead of live bands all the way back in the 1940s. But disco music as a style didn't emerge until the mid-1960s, when small New York clubs began playing music similar stylistically to Eurodisco, uplifting artists like Jerry Butler. Up until this point, the group disco catered to was exclusive and stayed out of the public eye. But soon, mainstream insight into these secretive venues sparked the disco inferno in the United States that we all know and love today. In 1971, disco was televised for the first time through the Soul Train music and dancing show. And after music critic Vince Aletti began attending the nightclub The Loft, he became enamored with disco culture and became motivated to publish the first ever mainstream article about disco in the Rolling Stone, titled Discotheque Rock. This public exposure caused small underground clubs to grow, to accommodate large crowds donning their very best platform shoes, high-tech speakers, and of course, the classic disco ball. Prior to 1970, radio had largely ignored disco as a genre. But by the time 1978 rolled around, there were 200 disco-only radio stations in the US alone. At this point, everyone was saying, "I love the nightlife," resulting in Donna Summer, ABBA, and the Bee Gees topping charts and staying alive in our playlist to this very day. But from its conception, disco has fundamentally been an art form of resistance. The club that laid the groundwork for disco stylistically actually arose as a form of Nazi resistance when Hitler continually labeled music created by non-white artists as a degenerate influence. This led French resistance groups to create hidden underground discotheques where this music could be enjoyed and celebrated in secret. And the influence of the discotheque was also prominent in the USSR, where even under Stalin's strict rule, dancing at disco clubs was still permitted. However, the USSR began to freak out as disco culture began to be seen as subversive. Soon, DJs were subject to strict regulation, and each dance required the music to be heavily censored and for the dance to be reported to the government before it could begin. There was no love train for disco. We remember jazz for the way it amplified black artists in the 1920s, rock and roll as a movement against established norms in the 60s, and disco music, well, disco makes us think of tacky music, mass production, and flashy lights. There is no love hangover for society's perception of this style. But our view of disco as a mere 70s fad means that we miss out on the nuances of the genre and the benefits it's given our society as a whole. To begin, the voices of the most popular songs were less masculine and for the first time were primarily female. And the club-centered music meant that singers no longer had to water down their lyrics to make them radio-friendly, allowing artists to deliver potent messages of power and sexuality, giving us classics like Shake Your Booty and Do You Think I'm Sexy? This focus on sexuality via music made a dramatic departure from the past, where the few songs that didn't sweep sexuality under the rug would focus on the desire that women created in men. However, prominent disco artists like Donna Summer recentered this narrative, and instead made their music about female pleasure derived from sexuality and the power women got when they embraced their own sexuality, causing singles like Love to Love You Baby to top charts for months at a time. The empowerment disco fostered arose partially as a result of the victories second-wave feminism gained in the early 70s, with the ERA gaining traction and the passage of Title IX and the Roe v. Wade decision. These newfound changes in attitudes towards femininity and sexuality reflected themselves in disco's fashion scene, where spandex bodywear, wrap dresses, and billowy pants became the must-have pieces. Many feminists denounced disco fashion, labeling it as objectification of the female body, but dancers and designers alike defended their style. Much like the lyrics of the music itself, disco was about empowerment for the individual, allowing clubgoers to choose between styles that ran the gamut from modest to revealing. Additionally, disco encouraged a newfound focus on men's fashion, and gave men the freedom to partake in traditionally feminine styles and focus on their appearances free of judgment. Disco uniquely contributed to the empowerment of female artists, as well as a more positive perception of open femininity and female sexuality. Additionally, don't stop till you get enough, because disco's unique cultural blend engendered the expression of fresh Black and Latinx artists who became wildly successful after previously being shunned artistically by society. Disco music was rooted in funk, which was derived from soul, and this music had previously been denounced as primitive by white society. However, Black disco artists used persistent use of chanted rhythms and Black rhythms by diverging from the music of the time, and instead using it as a unique way to display their culture to the world. The physical space disco occupied became a symbol of equality as well. Before disco's popularity, most dancing was restricted to couples dancing between a male and a female, and dancing between two males had actually been outlawed by New York City. However, disco broke this norm and instead catered to large group dancing, creating a safe space for LGBTQ individuals where same-sex couples could dance together and enjoy the nightlife. Clubs like the Saint or the Vatican of Disco claimed spaces and aesthetics that were traditionally heteronormative and turned them on their heads to make a safe space for queer individuals to express themselves. When examining today's society, the movement has still left its mark. For starters, by pioneering the 12-inch single, disco has, in turn, contributed to the songs we listen to today being lengthier, giving us all more time to act as dancing queens. Additionally, disco gave rise to DJing as a common practice. Since dance culture was a central component to disco stylistically, DJs would use new techniques like remixing, listening ahead to the next song through headphones, or creating seamless blends between two songs in order to make the experience the most fun for the clubgoers. And the rhythmic undertones, synths, and repetition of the music have become mainstays and inspiration of the modern-day pop that makes you shake your groove thing. But most importantly, disco amplified the voices of artists and clubgoers who society overlooked, and created a physical space through dance that was unique, inclusive, and truly unlike any other. But soon, the tarnish of disco's commercialism led to its last dance. When disco became perceived as popular, it created a massive influx of white working-class youth into the scene, which led to the gentrification of the genre. For the most part, some Black and LGBTQ artists were able to retain their success, but independent record labels soon became overtaken by the saturated music that reflected the commercialism of the time, as well as the increasingly white and heterosexual audience. The Disco Sucks movement came to represent the pinnacle of resentment against disco from white rock fans. Rooted in racism and homophobia, the largest known Death to Disco rally was held in late July of 1979. At Disco Demolition Night, fans who brought a disco record to be destroyed got a reduced ticket price to see the White Sox play, leading to a crowd of 59,000 people, bringing discs of not only disco music, but also Black and LGBTQ artists in general to be blown up and burned on the field. As journalist Dave March reflected, young white males were the most prominent group in attendance, because they were the ones who felt the most threatened by disco's success. After Demolition Night, the mass production of disco caused the music to be seen as oversaturated and cheap, as it became aired less and less on the radio as the months went on. However, the downfall of disco led artists to create new music that shifted towards other forms and genres, like boogie music and house that birthed modern-day Latin freestyle, techno, electronica, and EDM. Today, disco rarely makes an appearance on the radio, and sometimes will turn up on the odd playlist. Other genres of music still get recognition for the footprint they have left on society, and are revered for their success. And yet, most of us still think of disco as superficial, tacky, and overdone, overlooking all the complexities and cultural value it holds. Instead, we should take a chance on meaningful disco music and see how it allows us to progress as individuals and a society. Because once we realize that we are family, it's all a boogie wonderland.